The world feels more turbulent, let's say. I've just heard yesterday that Boeing are having to refit the lockers on hundreds of thousands of their aircraft toilets. And in Oxford, a quantum physicist describes the new quantum technology as indistinguishable from magic and talks about his hopes for a golden age of discovery once these machines are online. Welcome to the Internet Seriously, a humorous look at tech, news and politics. I'm Lucian Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor, also in Oxford.
I'm Alice Taylor, also in Oxford.
And today we are proud to welcome our special guest, product owner and lead designer of MuseScore notation software, also known for his YouTube channel, TANTACRUL, Martin Keary.
Hello, thanks very much for having me on. It's nice to meet you.
Martin, welcome. So before I hand over to Emily and Alice, who have been chatting to you a bit before this, one other topic we want to cover today, because it's kind of an intersection of everything that we are all interested in. A UK-US trade deal, there's a potential impact on NHS, and that's sparking a debate. Thank you very much. And before I hand over to Emily, I just wanted to say this is a super exciting show today. So please subscribe to this channel and hit follow on the Apple Podcasts and rate and review if you like us, and particularly Martin today. We're really, really happy to have you on, Martin. So Emily, over to you.
Great to see you. Thank you very much for joining us, Martin. Tantacruel. So you're a composer, a live musician in your past. I don't know if you still do live music. A UX, UI expert working on some of the most successful audio products in the world. You're also an amazingly successful YouTuber covering music, software, tech policy. I think you're a father as well. And so my question is, how do these elements fit together, and do you ever sleep?
I do sleep. Some things have to. I guess how I manage it is I'll just have like most people. I just have a big list of things. I use Trello to organize myself, and I'll just add priorities to things in the same way that you would have guessed if you're developing something. And I'll kind of ask myself at the beginning of each week, right, what are the things that need to be most prioritized? There may be a release coming of MuseScore or Audacity. There may be a video that I'm close to finishing. And I just balance my time accordingly. I do a couple of hours before, let's say, I begin work on my MuseScore or Audacity day job. I do a couple of hours once I get the kids to sleep at night. But at the same time, I do watch TV and stuff. So I don't feel like I'm
So you do life as well. You manage
exactly.
life. Yeah, that's amazing.
So I don't really know. I think if I was even more dedicated, but that would mean, of course, not being dedicated to the family, which I don't think is the right thing to do. But I could certainly get more stuff done, I guess.
Martin, I'm really always fascinated by bits of software. You mentioned Trello there. Why that and not MeisterTask or Google Tasks and things like that?
I've never tried Google Tasks. I think it's inertia. I used Trello years ago, back when it was the thing, especially for small startups, because it was free. And it's just, I don't need anything super complicated. And this is actually one thing that is a problem. And I think we all face it, which is it's very tough for me to pick up new technologies.
Yeah.
Like, for example, I've been thinking for a while, I'd love to move to DaVinci Resolve instead of Premiere. But in doing that, that's going to screw up everything for me because of all the integration it has with everything else. So I do find that picking up new technologies is particularly painful because it's going to take a few days.
So this is a question that I kind of had for you, Martin. So you focus on UX and UI. So in other words, the user's experience of software. Why do you think that's important, and what insights do you get from talking to and observing first-time users of your software?
I mean, it's important for a couple of reasons. I mean, I was interested in it when I was a user, especially when I was in university, and to call out to Adobe Illustrator. I remember just the people I studied with. I just put in the grind with that application. I just worked and slowly figured out all its idiosyncrasies. we weren't taught it in college, although we did have a session at the beginning, I think it was each Monday, where a teacher would literally stand up with no computer nearby and would describe to us how it works. So we'd have to write it down. And I love that teacher. I was my
That's
favorite
an
teacher.
amazing skill.
Yeah. But it was useless because no one ever, without doing it, you couldn't learn any of this stuff. But I remember some of my friends going, Martin, can you just help me? I just can't get this thing to appear in front. I can't get this layer to appear in front. And I'd look and I go, oh, I know why. It's not your fault. It's just this weird problem or idiosyncrasy with Adobe Illustrator. And then later on, when I studied composition, when I was using Sibelius, I had all these problems, which cost me like weeks and weeks of time.
And
bad
do you end up
documentation.
feeling I mean, when I try and use, I'm really not a graphic person, but I've tried I've tried to use like Photoshop a few times, and I just end up in tears, feeling like I'm the stupidest person in the world. And do you find when you talk to users that they commonly blame themselves rather than blaming the software?
Whenever I do a user testing session, and I normally do them with new users quite a lot, it's kind of my preferred type of session to run, because it's the hardest one to pass, right?
Yeah.
I find I have to say at the beginning, like, you're going to come across things that are a bit weird. You might not, but you likely will. And remember, that's our fault, not yours. This is why you're here. It's to find where we've made mistakes. And you do find people going, oh God, I feel a bit stupid now because I didn't figure that out. This is the thing, we're like, we haven't got much time. And when a new technology comes along that we want to try and use, we just expect it to behave intuitively, because especially throughout the early 2000s, we've learned that that's an expectation. We've learned that expectation. But from a business point of view, and this is answering your earlier question, it's super important, especially in a competitive landscape. If you have a product that, let's say, costs the same amount of money as another one that's already in the field, especially if you're an up-and-comer and you want to displace something, you have to be more intuitive, because if a person comes along and sees, oh, it all just kind of works, that's going to be massively, massively beneficial for you. And we can see examples in the notation space, for example, where Finale that was closed last year. I mean, it was the hardest to use by an absolute mile. It never really upped its game when newer competitors came along to make some of the tasks that it was known for much, much easier, So I think, like, from a business point of view, UX is absolutely crucial.
Absolutely crucial, and people don't do that testing phase enough. We find time and time again. I've been in this for 2 decades. Untested stuff by some of the richest companies in the world, British Airways online. They change their platform, and you just find you're down rabbit holes and you don't understand why you've got there. It's just basic stuff that hasn't happened, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also rather tough. I mean, I could go on about this at length, but I think not all designers know how to do it. There's a lot of sort of methodology porn out there, sort of books that tell you how to do it. But really, it's just a practical skill that you learn over time, and there's a degree of empathy involved, but also just reflection and self-criticism. You have to sort of accept that no matter how senior you are as a designer, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make less and less over time. But there are some companies who just don't have that in their DNA.
Yes.
And some that do.
And they also test what they like, they test what they know. You never get a developer testing their own software unless it's test-driven development, because they test what they like, they go into their comfort zones. They don't really try and break their own stuff.
Yeah, I think the simplest way to put it is, don't underestimate how much of a bias we all bring to designing software because of things that we currently use. When I was working on Paint 3D from Microsoft, I brought in all these biases from the Adobe suite. Now, that product ended up being a bit of a disaster, but
Yes.
That's a whole separate story. But when we were user testing it, I never user tested an app as much as that one, and I just learned so much from those sessions over about 4 years.
I want to talk a little bit more about Microsoft particularly, and I'm wrapping that up in a topic around the NHS, because both Alice and I did some time, let's call it that, let's use sort of prison terminology, in the NHS, and Microsoft really featured in that world for us particularly. Before we go on to that super exciting subject, it's time for our Guilty Pleasure Online.
Lovely.
Oh, there you go. You're a musician. You appreciate this. We got Charlie here who actually composed that piece of music. It's
And
kind of
Pat, who did the video,
yeah,
the
it's,
visuals.
sexy
Who's
and
a big
techie.
fan of yours.
There's definitely a load of innuendo about what we're expecting here. Martin Keary, what is your guilty pleasure online?
Well, I've given some thought about this. My guilty pleasure is YouTube. I think, just as an aside, I think that if you want to be successful in social media, you need to really know and use the social media that you're trying to break into. So if you're not really watching YouTube and you don't sort of get to understand its idioms and everything, you'll struggle. But besides that, I do just, it's my preferred thing to go to when I have half an hour and I just want to like relax for a bit. All right, let's see what's on YouTube, and I'll try to find something interesting. But over the years, I kind of developed a few guilty pleasures for YouTube channels that really weren't aimed towards me, that I found maybe funny or just bizarre.
Yeah.
And the ones that, like, in particular, I kind of got interested in about 2020 were family YouTube channels. In particular, there was one called the Kelly Crew, just a family in the US. Can't remember exactly what country or what state they were from, and they just brought out their entire family to just go do whatever, daily blog, and serious amount of work they put into it. But they had no real, because they had so much work to do with their jobs, with looking after the family and with the the practicalities of setting up lighting and everything. They really scrimped on the focus and purpose of each video. So it was just them with a bunch of cameras and almost like semi-abstract ad-lib sort of like cuts of them going to Starbucks or them going, and by the way, they're sort of trapped in suburbia in the worst possible sense of course, meaning all they can do is drive to a place where you buy things, and that's basically their video. So we're going to go to Starbucks, and name of kid is going to try out the new flavor, and that will be the video.
Do you think we're saturated with this big entertainment where we're sort of watching this big package stuff, the sort of big movie things, the big Netflix streaming channels with the hyper stories, and people just want something more mundane, something real? We had another presenter on who was saying he really likes to sort of literally stalk people presenting their own crap court cases in the States. And Emily,
Well, I just heard of one this weekend. Apparently, at the moment, what's all the rage in Norway is 24-hour moose migration. So they're watching the mooses migrate in real time, just like the epitome of slow TV. 24-hour coverage, apparently enormous. But what happened in the end of what happened to the Kelly Crew? Is there a reveal? Did something happen?
Yeah. When I come across one of these oddities, I do tend to like save the videos. Just ones I find particularly funny. A time they met a retired couple in a car park and just had had lunch with them, apropos of nothing, and just sat like having a really awkward conversation. Yeah, they had a weird ending. I discovered their channel had disappeared a couple of years ago. Prior to that, I remember they released a video called something like "Major Announcement, this is big news," and that's kind of the general way their thumbs are. So I wasn't expecting much, but it turns out that the father, Ryan Kelly, was running for governor of, I'm gonna say, God, was it Massachusetts? I can't remember the exact. I can't remember the exact state he was running for, and he was running for governor anyway. This is the 2022 primaries, and I kind of didn't check up on them for a while. I certainly didn't check up on the race, and when I came back, their channel was gone. And it turned out that what had happened was Ryan had been arrested midway through, during the campaign. He'd fallen into fourth place in the Republican primaries, and the reason was because he had taken part in the January 6th riots. And,
oh my God!
He ended up serving.
Was he the guy in the hat?
No, he ended up serving 3 months in prison. He didn't actually break into the compound, but he held up with a fence for other people to get through. I think that's what he did anyway. So that was major news. And then I think they basically cut their losses. They killed the channel and all their other sort of sister channels as well. So I was like, okay, well, that's a pretty interesting ending.
Martin, you mentioned, I mean, you've gone more generic than a number of us, because a number of people have mentioned particular YouTube channels. You've said YouTube in general, and I agree with you there. I love it, especially if you've got 5 or 10 minutes. You don't want to kind of go through 60 channels of shit on the TV to choose from. You can just tune into you, and it does have some algorithm that's figuring out the stuff you lurk over and scroll over. And as you said, you use the words know and use and break into YouTube and understand it. You've got best part of 500,000 followers. Give us a couple of tips. How did you build that following, apart from fantastic content, which I think is the heart of it?
What did I do? I mean, early on, I didn't have much luck. I just started trying out videos. I thought I've got stuff to say about music. I actually started it because we knew we were having twins. I just finished my master's in composition, and I realized I was going to be, going and doing, let's say, rehearsals in other countries wasn't going to happen for a little while. So I thought, well, I've got lots of stuff to say. I have an editing background, and I can make, I've got a visual background. I'll try it out. I tried a few different topics. A lot of them were on discussing existing either contemporary music or classical music, usually a mixture of both. I hit a lot of copyright claim. I hit that famous copyright claim issue early on. And I tried promoting myself as best I could. I'd post my stuff on Reddit. Then I discovered that that's kind of frowned upon. So you're not really allowed to do that. So I didn't anymore. Shared it with friends, etc. And I just kept trying stuff out. I kept it quite loose. And I found that where I was struggling was I'm trying to do a lot of commentary on music without much profile, and certain things wouldn't land particularly well. It wasn't until I really started kind of dropping the commentary on existing recorded music and started just thinking a bit more broadly.
Wow.
The first video I made that was a success was the Sibelius review. It's not even really a review. It's more a
converted me from being, when I was at school in like the 2010s, they taught us Sibelius in like music GCSE, and I just didn't really know there was any other option. So you described it so well, of like diligently trudging to learning all of the terrible of like, I need to change the time signature, so I go into this menu, and then there's this sub menu, and then there's a sub menu, and then if you go into settings, and it's like when I saw your video of like things like, I've made a new score, I want to add some instruments, should just be like an option, rather than like collapse SATB choir, which is like one of the main.
And then intuitive.
And I watched your video and I was like, oh,
someone understands.
There's another way of doing this.
It's the most common. That's the most common response I get, especially from people in the UK, was they were forced to use it in their GCSEs. I mean, I guess what I learned from that was, one, think outside the box and try to do something interesting that no one else has done. It wasn't a review; it was more a tone poem about frustration. The second thing was, I kind of leaned into my own sense of humor. I leaned into my own accent and voice. I've come to realize that the way I speak is, and my accent and stuff is a bit of a differentiator too. And also I leaned into my sense of humor, which is a bit weird and abstract and slightly dark at times as well. And all those things kind of together, whilst also talking about something that were interesting to people, seemed to coalesce in that video. And that's what I kind of learned, was just try to bring your own.
There are some things from that video that it's like they live in my head, of you being like, they get this message, which is that you've done something wrong message. And I'm like, I see that. It's a you've done something wrong message in software that's unusable.
We've been doing a lot of work with another big YouTuber, Kit Boga, who specialises in scamming the scammers and just engaging in endless scam baiting, getting into endless conversations. And he said he found that transformative for him when he became more and more authentic, and he got off script and he started talking with his own voice or own voices. And I think the YouTube audience smell that. I mean, I get this sense that you kind of went back to what your values and things that matter to you, and talked with your own voice, and that seemed to ring true to a lot of people.
Yeah, I think if I was to be critical, not just of anyone, I mean, I think it's a common criticism. It's the criticism I'd have of my own early work, is that when you're starting out in any media, you tend to imitate a lot more. You tend to do things you've seen other people do. You use memes that you've seen other people use, and that's not really your content, and people can kind of sniff that out. Speaking for myself, I don't really do too much ad lib. I live a lot in the script phase.
We noticed,
But that's just because it's a necessity because of the format of the video. I mean, some people don't do it that way. But when I do the scripts, I read them out over and over again, so when I say them, they'll work right. And then I often take a well-written script and make it like a little less well-written, so that it sounds right when I say it, So all this stuff, it's different for every person. It's just being reflective and trying to identify your own personality and where you're strong, and also where you're maybe not so strong.
And that's
like if you're not a very funny person, don't try to be funny.
No, don't. So Martin, I've got a little quiz for you because I really enjoyed your short video essay on Hallelujah covers. So I've got covers versus original. Which is your favourite? Okay, number 1, Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen or Jeff Buckley?
I prefer the Jeff Buckley version. And darn, I've forgotten the name of the person who Jeff Buckley is basically imitated, because Jeff Buckley's version is an imitation of another artist.
Nick
I can't remember
Drake.
the name off the top.
No,
not Nick Drake. I do love Nick Drake.
I love Nick Drake. Yeah,
okay,
we all
next
love Nick Drake.
question. Kiss.
But I hate the Jeff Buckley. I hate the Leonard Cohen version.
No,
I really don't like it. I think it's horrible.
Do you not like Leonard Cohen?
Well, that's the thing. Everyone's like, "Oh, but it's Leonard Cohen." It's like, yeah, Leonard Cohen made a bad song. It's possible. I just think it's a boring, dull, overly long.
Oh, burning!
And it wasn't popular. No one liked it. It was a total hit and a miss until.
Yeah. And so let's go for Kiss. Prince or Tom Jones?
Oh, who did it first? Well,
Prince wrote it.
Obviously.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't care. I mean, Tom Jones.
Okay.
It doesn't matter what he did. It's not going to be as good.
Last question. Islands in the Stream. Bee Gees or Nessa and Bryn from Gavin and Stacey?
I don't even know the song.
Oh
no, Dolly Parton.
Listening to the Bee Gees would be something
that would not suit you.
I don't believe you.
If it was me, I would be going for Nessa and Bryn.
Yeah. Well, I probably know the song. I just don't know the name.
I think
I never know the name of anything. I have terrible memory for names of songs and names of artists.
We guessed what you'd think with the first two. You've revealed more about yourself in the answer to the third.
Yeah,
Emily, you jumped the queue. That's fantastic.
I did
because
jump
actually,
the queue.
but I do want to talk something in common for all of us, which is this US. I can't leave Trump alone. We have to talk about it a bit all the time because we're trying to pull out the tech and the politics, and we're very interested in the impact on tech because that's our industry. The UK-US trade deal that they're muttering away about, so that hits something. It has a potential tech impact on the NHS, and there are 3 things that I'm interested in there. First of all, just to let you know, Martin, that when I left music and acting, the first thing I did was go into the NHS for a while to just understand what real jobs were like, and I ended up in the information processing department in Camden and Islington NHS Trust, which probably covers an area of London that you live in and all the hospitals and community health centres around there. And 25 years later, my daughter Alice ends up going into the health service as well. She lasted about 13 months before her nervous breakdown, and I had my nervous breakdown after about 12 months. And just the whole thing was about who's the winner there? And the whole thing was about the crap tech that's in the NHS and how you really do need better tech to make things happen. You can go to Heathrow and get a flight with better tech than you do to check in for an operation. I mean, Alice, what was the password policy in your local trust?
Oh, which one? I mean, there's just so many horrendous.
Okay, without revealing the actual password, would it be true or false to say that you could access the entire adult and children mental health records in a county with a single password across all users?
Maybe. I wouldn't possibly.
Can't possibly reveal that.
No, sorry to put you on the spot.
Terrible information.
Were you allowed to put it on a USB stick and leave it on a bus?
Oh my God. Well, the thing that drove me absolutely crazy, right? So we have all this training about, GDPR and confidentiality, very important stuff, which is very like, you will go to prison if you get this wrong, and you will deserve to go to prison, and everyone's like, okay, yes. And then at the same time, the software that is being used is like, oh, guys, good news, we're updating to 64-bit, woohoo! And like, it was just breathtakingly terrible. And I would say that most of your job I was a practicing speech and language therapist, so a clinician, 50 to 80% of your job is like phoning up someone's GP and being like, please, can you send us all their health records because our software isn't compatible with your software, so we don't have the same records. And then they go to hospital, and then you have to ring the hospital. You have to phone them because, if you email, you will just never hear back. And that's the only way of requesting information. And it's like, what happened in the hospital? How long did they stay? Please, can you send us this report? And it's like, rather than just going and seeing your patients and actually helping them.
So Martin, you're quite rightly taking a very critical look at the movement in tech and big tech, particularly in those big companies. At the same time, the UK government is trapped in having to do this deal with the US and fix the NHS. Where are we going with this? Do you think we're going to end up with USA tech fixing the NHS?
I mean, I don't know. You had Microsoft is obviously heavily involved in the NHS at the moment. I know that they use Outlook and they use
Teams,
their version of Chromium and Teams and everything.
Are you a fan of Microsoft?
Well, having worked for them, I have a kind of a nuanced attitude towards them. I mean,
I'd agree.
On the one hand, I was there while we were trying to get while we were struggling with GDPR, and I remember how seriously they took it and how much they drilled it into us. This is super important. And at the time, we were all just like, oh, more work to do. We didn't really quite appreciate how important it was because back then I wasn't really paying too much attention to the privacy stuff like I do today. I think many people weren't. Other things like accessibility, Microsoft had a rule that nothing could go into Windows unless it passed pretty strict accessibility guidelines for people who are, with vision impairment, not just people who are blind, any kind of visual impairment or mobility impairment. And our two of the products I worked on were delayed specifically by months on end because they didn't pass those guidelines. So they take a lot of this stuff quite seriously. At the same time, there is a Microsoft problem that everyone knows about, which is just the bureaucracy. The different divisions will all have different sort of motivations and a degree of autonomy, which leaves you in a situation where you try to sign in to one email. Yes. And then it takes you to a different Microsoft sign-in with a different preloader, which then takes you into a third one with an even older Windows 95 preloader.
I think I'm permanently stuck in one of those trying to get into Teams, and I just use the browser instead now because I just can't.
I can't get into Teams even now. I mean, I work with people in Microsoft where we collaborate on stuff with Audacity, all the time. And whenever I jump onto a Teams call, it just will not work.
This was something that, because as a speech therapist, I worked a lot with accessible technology, which is... it's just amazing because you'll have something incredible, life-changing, like an eye gaze tracking piece of software designed for someone who's had a severe brain injury, and it's got a really intuitive user interface, and it's really easy to use, but they can't remember their password because they've had a traumatic brain injury, so they can just never use the technology. And it's just these little things that it's like, I always think of you and your video, it's like the you've done something wrong message, or these barriers that we completely take for granted, and then to somebody whose experience we haven't thought about, it's just it makes the software unusable.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess when it comes to the thing you asked, obviously I think it's pretty disgraceful if part of the trade deal forces the UK to use American tech that they'd rather not use. But even in there, they already are using a lot of American tech. The question for me would be, is the data all stored in an EU server? A big part of GDPR. Is it compliant with the Digital Services Act and GDPR and stuff like that? If that's all working fine, and also if the NHS ends up getting better software and better tools to manage themselves, and if it's not going to cost an absolute fortune, because I recall that this was going to happen. I think in the Gordon Brown government there was this massive budget for a big NHS tech overhaul, and then it got canned or scrapped or something later on. I don't remember the details.
I was part of that, and it failed spectacularly, and it was because there wasn't an appetite for centralized controls and centralized data. Now there is. I mean, we're moving towards national identity, people's digital identity. People are talking about one big key concern that's been highlighted around US-UK trade deal involves data access, of course, as you mentioned, with US companies just they're going to gain greater access to NHS patient data. I agree with you at that, and it will also, I think, a trade deal that's in favour of US coming more and more into the NHS, this superpower, will sort of limit the UK's ability to regulate this space, I think. But the thing I'm most worried about is the UK not taking this on with their own development capabilities and actually shipping out a whole load of NHS cash to US companies. Even if it is better quality to start with, that would be, I think, an opportunity lost potentially forever.
I don't know. I really don't. I mean, like governments, I sit somewhere so much in the middle on these kinds of questions. Governments trying to pick winners, and especially governments trying to lead software projects.
Yes.
I'm trying to recall a time where that happened, where it wasn't a total disaster.
I think I totally agree with you. And also, I mean, when I was working in the NHS, they didn't really talk about systems. They did talk about Microsoft as though that was the internet and that was systems. Now, we've talked enough about politics. That's all very interesting. So we're going to move on to more fun. It's time for our Tech Room 101. Room 101. We're so pleased to have our special guest on today, Martin Keary, the host of TANTACRUL. Martin, the Tech Room 101 is something that you identify, one or more things that you think it'd be great to just bin that forever and not see it ever again. Martin, what would go into your Tech Room 101?
I mean, there's many things. I could pick a serious one and a kind of silly one.
Okay.
My silly one is
two,
on YouTube. I am really fed up with this new convention of people trying to issue or create tutorials on any type of topic, and the tutorial is always them face palming, going, "Don't do this." And if it's like audio production, it'll show a knob for compression settings or something, and the person's going, "Oh," and I hate that entire attitude. It's like it's done to get clicks. So it's thinking like, "Oh, what's the stupid thing I'm doing that I should be doing differently?" I just hate that whole approach. Anyway, my serious thing, I think pretty obvious one would be, I would love for us, I don't think it's ever going to happen anytime soon, to be able to definitively remove bots from social media. It's just absolutely everywhere. I remember the other day on The Rest is Politics, Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell and the Mooch, what's his name? Anthony Scaramucci.
Yeah, I love him.
They compared the tweets they put out, which they specifically put out to run a kind of an experiment with some American, I think it was an American firm, who were able to detect with some degree, they say, of certainty, which responses are bots. And they were coming back with something like 25, 30, 40% of responses highly calibrated to sort of attack their character, to forward them onto other people they knew would attack what they're saying. This is just so destructive to debate, and makes the situation with social media already as bad as it seems it could be, but probably a lot worse to go.
I think we'd all agree with you there. Just and they don't stop, do they? Emily,
No.
you wanted to ask
Martin,
something to
I
Martin.
just have to cover your brilliant Facebook video essay, 3 hours long, a real tour de force. I'd like to understand what drove you to make it, and I guess it's sort of, my working life, I spend a lot of time as a policy person advising government on policy and trying to think up solutions to really complex policy problems. And I find that it's comfortable to sit and describe the problem, and we all know that the dream of social media kind of went wrong somehow. Societies haven't really coped with them, didn't really get ahead of this as a movement. And I wonder now, like, knowing what you know now, having made your video essay, if you had a magic wand, what would you do to sort of harness the good things about social media, but really get rid of those bad things? I mean, it's not just bots, is it? It's sort of the effect, the impact on societies. And if you were a policymaker, what would you do?
If I was a policymaker, what I'd do? I mean, I would try to, I think probably our best bet is a mixture of legislation, things like child protection, things like sharing data, like forcing the companies to share their data, certain types of data. Maybe there's a lot to be said about, not sharing data that gives away people's identities or whatever. But how their algorithms work, that would be some kind of data we'd love to be able to see, so that we can see how they're targeting misinformation. So I think there's a potpourri of different kinds of rules to do with protecting children, not allowing misinformation to be shared, sharing how their algorithms work, stuff like that, which, there's many things like that that governments are mulling over at the moment. Apart from that, also antitrust cases or antitrust legislation. We're obviously right at the very beginning now of a major antitrust case, which may very well be interfered with and has already been seemingly interfered with by Trump right now in the US, having fired the head of the Trade Commission and putting in place one of his own people instead.
Doesn't
I think all those
well,
things in
does
combination,
it, for a benign outcome, does it?
Yeah.
But,
So I think a lot of those things all need to be done together, but also enforcing data protection rules. Like the EU now have just broadly better data protection rules, and we have an AI. I can't remember what the AI law is called.
it's
But let's
called
say a framework
the EU
for how
AI Act. Yes, it's a huge framework.
and the US doesn't have this stuff yet, and therefore companies in the US are able to sort of get away with murder, it seems.
Do you
and we
think
don't know
there's
what
any chance under this administration of anything?
Well, no, they're corrupt. They're just it's a grift. They're not going to do it. All they're going to do is try to enrich their friends. Normally that's hyperbole. Normally I hate when people say stuff like that because it sounds like hyperbole, and I just think it's very clear. It's obvious to everyone that they're just trying to enrich their friends. They're trying to cut out the poorest countries in the world. They're trying to bully countries all over the world in order to set preferential trade agreements for themselves, et cetera, et cetera. We can't expect anything virtuous from this government. And if anything virtuous happens, it'll probably happen because Trump didn't realize or just didn't pay attention. So right now, I think we can't expect much. And there's the act, the COSA, or it's not called the COSA Act. COSA, what is it? The Kids Online Safety Act, which has its detractors, and there's definitely some concerns about it. That's going nowhere, it seems. With this particular.
Well, the legislature is just
I don't know if it's some AI at our end, but just as you said, Trump's government is corrupt. It sort of went darker in your studio, and it all became more focused.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about my. I wanted to get my DSLR set up, but some of my.
It looks really cool.
It looks
No,
very
you've
cool.
suddenly gone
It's
really
gone
cool.
sort of quite, Caravaggio.
Okay. Well,
let's just
Martin,
run with it.
But
yeah, I don't know. There's so many different things. I also think people need to vote with their feet a lot more, and it seems that the more stuff they keep doing. Allowing the genocide to happen in Myanmar, the lack of control, or rather the relaxing of the controls that they were responsible for in the 2020 election, disabling their what they called break the class measures, which stopped the spread of information and hate and stuff like that, which they turned it off in December. The January 6th riots happened in January. They could have probably prevented that from happening, and all the various other things that they've done. I think it's opening people's eyes more and more, and they're demanding more from their legislators. But at the moment, we need the US to kind of lead here, or we need the EU to essentially go, we're done. We're going to maybe champion some of our own.
It's a turbulent time.
Maybe the Commission will start a new social media platform. That would really help.
And government-led tech.
But thank you very much for that. And I think that video essays like yours that have such a very wide reach, I think really help to communicate to people what is going on behind those social media platforms. So thank you very much for that.
And thank you very much, Martin. I really could talk to you a lot more, and it's fascinating to have you on our podcast. Thank you. The world is feeling more turbulent. None of you asked me about the Boeing toilets, but never mind. But I think we are at a crossroads, and positive things can happen. And I think people are voting as well. Certainly, we had a big reverse of culture in the UK, and I hope that people are going to sort of start thinking about things in a different way, and it won't impact too much on big nasty tech. Before we finally sign off today, you were talking about the quality of content and focusing on real issues rather than meme issues. We have a comment of the week. We have our Voice of God, who's our resident musician sound guy. Voice of God, what is our comment of the week?
Hello, everyone.
Hello,
well,
God.
Before I read out this comment, I need to fanboy for a moment here. Mr. TANTACRUL.
All right. God is a fan.
I am a fan. I did a music degree, and in my third and final year for my dissertation, I did a little self-produced EP, and I could not have done it without MuseScore 4. So
Oh, wow.
I just want to
Okay.
say thank you very much for the complete overhaul of MuseScore 3, because I couldn't have done it without that.
There you
Anyway.
go, Martin. Well, God has a day job. God has a day job.
I do.
Thanks, God. Which God are you? Which?
Oh, don't go there.
All of them, whatever one you like.
God of the internet.
But anyway, comment of the week. This is from a while back on the wee cat video on
yes.
TikTok, and somewhat Boaty McBoathead commented, "Glad to see someone tackling the important issues." And we need everyone to know that we always tackle important issues on the internet seriously.
Yeah, and you missed a follow-up where they went, well, what about world famine and real problems? Because the background to this, Martin, is that Alice is trying to, you say, know and use and break into the channels. And this was one on TikTok where she spun a little clip of this podcast and talked about a cat called the wee cat, and it got 1.5 million views. And so there is this game, isn't there, between quality content and absolute shit, and some of our best sort of have you found that at all, Martin? Is actually your best stuff the quality stuff? Or
No.
sometimes
I was thinking, like, hold on a sec. I never said that I think people should only focus on serious topics. I mean,
Oh, okay.
all you gotta do,
The
all you
wee
gotta do
cat
is
was
look at-
brilliant.
Yeah.
All you gotta do is look at some of my previous videos, and you'll see a whole lot of total nonsense. I'm a big fan of deviating into complete nonsense. Sometimes it's
Nice.
creative and funny or interesting in some way. No, I like it's a mixture, right? I think
Okay.
that's the ideal. Gotta have
Right.
some fun in life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally agree. Thank you very much. Today we've been talking to a special guest, product owner and lead designer of musical notation software, and also known for his fabulous YouTube channel, TANTACRUL. Thank you very much, Martin Kiri.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was fun. Thanks, God.
No problem.